Okay, so welcome everybody. My name's John Bandler, and presenting with me today are Danny Shields and Rachelle Ho, with whom I've worked for quite a long time. There they are. They're also co-hosts as well, so they can take over if something happens to me and my internet goes down. We're going to be talking about engaging real people in 3 realistic minutes. A 3-minute thesis workshop for the European Microwave Week 2022. I'm delighted that a 3MT will be held there in Milan, and wish everybody, all the contestants, the best of luck. I'll introduce myself. Some of you know me already. I've been in microwaves for, oh boy, next year will be 60 years. So 60 years, in 2023 will be 60 years in microwave engineering. I've written plays, I've directed plays, I've produced plays, and actually last year I created a film in which Rachelle Ho contributed, and I'll be releasing that film very shortly on YouTube for everybody to watch. So that's me. Danny, say a few words about yourself.
Sure. So I did my undergrad in MEng at McMaster University in Hamilton, and I'm currently working in the auditory engineering lab, working on a model of an auditory nerve. And I've been working with John for the past year within our electrical and computer engineering department's 3-minute thesis course, where students do the same sort of thing and they present their thesis research in 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Danny's done an amazing job helping with video production and so on. And right now we're battling with the video from the IMS symposium, battling with audio and video issues. The footage was just dumped on us, basically, the raw footage for us to work with. So Danny's doing an amazing job on that right now. Rachelle, it's your turn to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachelle Ho, and I just finished my PhD at McMaster University looking at children with concussion using magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. And I got to know John just before I competed in the 3MT at some point in time. And then since then, I've had the opportunity to be a judge for the IMS and for other departmental 3MT competitions that John has been part of. And so it's really a pleasure to be part of this again here, even though I'm not going to be with you in Europe. It's nice to still have a part in this.
Thanks, Rachelle. Rachelle, as you can see, we've known each other for quite a long time here. And she was a judge for 2020 and 2021 of the IMS virtual 3MT. And of course, she was also a judge when Valentina Palazzi did her presentation. So we'll be coming to that. So she may give you some inside information about Valentina's presentation. So this will keep you interested. This will keep you interested to hang around. Okay, one suggestion that I have with Zoom meetings is, well, avoid virtual backgrounds is one thing I always recommend. Have real backgrounds makes you more authoritative than virtual. I suggest hiding non-video participants because they will tend to clutter your screen. And one of the things a lot of people don't realize is there's a partition in the gallery view side-by-side mode where you can actually scale the size of the slide. You don't have to see the slide very big. You can scale the slide down, increase the size of the videos of the presenters. So that's something you can experiment with on your own, okay? Just a suggestion. So some acknowledgements here. Simona Di Maio is the person who, spearheaded this invitation. And there are members here of the 3-minute thesis committee for the Milan conference, and the general chair, Luca Perregrini, is here. So Simona, why don't you say a few words and introduce Professor Perregrini and so on?
Yeah, okay. Professor Perregrini is the General Chair of the European Microwave Week 2022. And okay, probably Professor Perregrini doesn't need an introduction, but he was editor-in-chief of the Transaction on Microwave Theory and Techniques. I take this opportunity also to thank a lot Francesca Benassi, Enrico Massoni, Andrea Motroni, and Valentina Palazzi, because we selected all together the participants. And I take also this opportunity to congratulate with you on being selected as finalists in the 3 minutes thesis competition. And this is the first year that this event is organized in the framework of European Microwave Week. And it was a success because we received more than 20 applications. So you were selected because of the quality of your mini videos, so 30 seconds videos, and also the topics that you presented that are all very interesting. And now you have to work with Professor Bandler and his team, but for sure he will prepare you as well as possible for this competition. So I really hope that you will join the event and the conference and all the week.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Perregrini. You want to say a few words?
Yes, of course. First of all, I would like to thank Professor John Bandler, who was very kind in supporting us for this initiative, as he has a very long-standing experience, and I think it will help a lot also the participants in this contest. And of course, thanks to Danny and Rachelle for their support too, and to Simona and all the other people in the team that are working on this. Actually, I was somehow pushing for this event during the European Microwave Week, because I believe it's very interesting for students to participate into this, which is somehow, let's say, promotional for our society, for our community, because we have to be able not only to do very good research, but also to spread the results and to make people understanding what we are doing, which is very, very tough, especially if you have a general audience. And this is the scope, essentially, of also this workshop that Professor Bandler will give you to help in understanding how to, and also helping in making your presentation at the best. Therefore, thank you very much, John, for this, and to all of you for participating, and all my best for all the attendees and participants to this, and see you in Milan next September. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luca. Great encouragement to everybody. I hope everybody feels inspired. I have a lot of people to acknowledge here, people I've worked with over the many years. As I say, they're listed here, and I hate leaving them out. I hate to leave people out. And of course, Erin, Kiley, my co-organizer for the IMS, and then subsequently Microwave Week 3MT since 2017, and so she needs a special acknowledgement. She's been working with me for a long time. So what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about things that you should do, could do, and things you shouldn't do in presentations. And I'll try to differentiate between virtual, digital, and in-person. So virtual is something like this. Digital may be a pre-recorded video, and in-person is what you're going to be doing in the 3-minute thesis in the European Microwave Week in Milan. So we're going to deal with some 3MT case studies. We'll play the videos, talk about them. And I'm going to talk about core images that you want people to take away with them afterwards, something that they can really remember. How to compose a slide, and composition of the title, a catchy title, and so many other things. First impressions, ethics, citations, the difference between authenticity and theatricality, being fake or being authentic. And then, of course, questions and answers. And please, everybody, don't hesitate to interrupt anytime. I know I say this and people are still very shy, but please interrupt anytime. If anything on the screen jumps out at you and you want to ask a question. This is the film that I mentioned that I had worked on a year ago during the height of the lockdown of the pandemic in Ontario, Canada, and we had original music for this, and the logo that you can see on those coffee cups were designed by Rachelle Ho, and that was her contribution. And those of you, by the way, who know me for space mapping, if you look at that logo very carefully, look at the two heads, look at the two brains, and you notice that within each brain, there is an image of the other brain, then you might somehow relate that to my engineering work on space map. Space mapping is everywhere. It features even in my artistic work. Rachel, you want to say anything about that, that logo design? Because space mapping is an important issue in engineering right now.
I don't have much to contribute other than after you get a chance to work with John Bandler, it leads to other opportunities to explore scientific or engineering topics, even through art. So it was a fun little project to do over the pandemic.
And by the way, Emily Wood, Megan Vierhout, as well as Rachelle Ho are all PhD students from McMaster University. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of things to cover, and obviously we're not going to cover everything. The list here is endless. When you're trying to communicate an idea, there are just so many factors to this that it's dizzying thinking about it. Is anything that jumps out at you here, Rachel, that you think people should kind of keep in mind as we go forward?
I always really like the term story on this slide. And I say always because John and I have talked about this quite a bit. So based on brain imaging studies, stories are sort of impactful and sort of are more memorable to people because they actually do activate more parts of your brain. So it side when you're telling that story for you to be able to follow the story, and then it activates a more emotional side as well. And because both of those two parts of your brain are being, or multiple parts of your brain are being activated at the same time, stories become a little bit more memorable. And so when you start your speech with a story, it sort of captivates and keeps you a little bit more memorable in the eyes of the judges or in just your audience in general. And it might even help you create your speech a little bit better if you think about it as a story rather than just a paper that you're writing and taking like a little abstract out of your paper.
Danny, anything jump out at you here?
Yeah, I think for me, what jumps out is the first impression. So particularly this competition is going to be in person, and making sure you understand how you present yourself, and even before you get up on stage, how that's going to impact the judges, and think about that. And that even goes beyond just this competition, whether it's a interview or meeting, how you appear and how you present yourself and carry yourself is really important to how people perceive you.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I was going to mention that as well. And admitting setbacks. The interesting thing that you should notice throughout is nobody seems to admit setbacks. But setbacks is part of drama. Setbacks are part of story. If you think of any story that has a real impact, there's always a setback to the story. So you can make your presentation more impactful by sometimes sharing your mistakes or wrong directions that you went in. So honestly, this is a highly overlooked area. I strongly encourage some of you to think about some setbacks you might have had, because that might give you an edge over the competitor who's boasting that everything went well. Okay, so anyway, so there's all kinds of different ways of presenting. Obviously, is it in a classroom, in an auditorium? Is it an online meeting like this? Is it one-on-one? Is it in person? Is it online? Is it on camera? Is it to an off-camera right now? An on-camera interview, I'm looking straight into the camera, or is it an off-camera interview? All of these create different feelings in the audience as to whether you're looking straight at the audience or whether you're pretending or actually looking at an off-camera interviewer who's looking at you and talking to you. So keep all of these things in mind. Obviously, we're not going to cover everything, but we will focus on the 3-minute thesis, and in a nutshell, 3 minutes or less. And please, I beg you, don't try to hit 3 minutes as a target. It's not the target, it's the upper bound, okay? When somebody tells you, you know, make sure that the ceiling of your house is no less than or no more than a certain amount, don't make that your target. You know, keep your presentation well under 3 minutes if you can. You'll be more relaxed. And one static PowerPoint slide, and that needs to be visible for the full duration of your presentation. And the Queensland criteria for 3-minute thesis talk about judging criteria under general headings called comprehension and content, engagement and communication. I'm not going to go into the details of this. This is more for the judges actually to worry about. But you can go and see the full list of requirements on the website in Queensland. But in a nutshell, it's a single static PowerPoint slide, no other electronic media, no notes. You're not allowed to hold anything up. You're not allowed to read from a sheet of paper. And obviously no dancing, no singing, no poetry, and so on. And if you go over 3 minutes, you're going to be simply disqualified. That's it. No matter how good your presentation. People often say, when does the presentation begin? Well, you know, you have to make a judgment. The judges have to do a judgment as to when it looks like you have actually started your presentation. So if through gesture, through movement, through speech, it looks like you've just started your presentation. So that's important. And the panel's decision is final. So there is no appeal. There's no court of appeal here. Some do's and don'ts. Please don't use jargon. But if you do use jargon, use it very carefully, and we can talk about that later. Don't get stuck in details. Details confuse. They're very difficult to carry away by the audience. Use metaphors that are easy to understand, but beware of metaphors. Sometimes a metaphor to a non-specialist member of the audience can still sound like a scientific concept. So be careful that your metaphor is not taken literally, okay? Include human stories, and we'll see a lot of that or hear a lot of that in our examples. Now, when you memorize a speech, the authenticity is at risk, because when you memorize something, you may come out and say it in a robotic way, and that is not going to be very engaging. So your authenticity could be at risk if you're in the memorization process. And make sure that the audience has something to take away that's tangible. Now, unlike other workshops that I've been involved in, we're going to do the examples first, then go into some of the details later, rather than leave the examples until later. So we have some case studies coming up, some videos I'm going to play. Look for metaphor, look for believability, look for purposeful gestures, look for the arm movement, look which direction the arms are moving. Is it the left arm? Is it the right arm? Is it both arms? You know, kind of look at those gestures. Listen to dramatic pauses. Listen to when the speaker stops speaking for a second or two. Is it relatable to a general audience? Is there some humor in it? Is there some storytelling? So try to listen to this. I'm going to be playing one of the famous case studies, Daniel Tajik, the winner in Honolulu in 2017, a first place in audience choice winner, and I also proudly I co-supervised him with Professor Natalia Nikolova. He's now graduated with a PhD, and he's out there in industry working. So anyway, so proudly to present this. Let's play this and talk about it after the event. Okay, here we go.
X-rays cause cancer. It's a little unnerving to think about, isn't it? I'm sure most of us here have had X-ray scans done at some point in our lives, and it's obvious why. The benefits of diagnosing diseases outweighs the risks of creating cancer. Yet it begs a question. Is this really the best we can do? I think there may be a better way. Microwaves. And no, I'm not talking about the kind I cook my popcorn in. I'm talking about microwave radiation. Similar in power level to the Wi-Fi signals bouncing all around us. You see, in comparison to X-rays, microwaves have a clear advantage. They're non-ionizing, which means they don't cause cancer. You may be saying to yourself, that sounds amazing, but why don't we see this in hospitals right now? And the answer to that is twofold. It either takes hours to produce an image, or the image resolution is too poor to see anything. And that is where my work steps in. My name is Daniel Tajik, and I'm developing an algorithm known as microwave holography. Microwave holography is a mathematical strategy to reconstructing 2D and 3D images. It works by performing a mapping between two things. One, an estimate of how the electromagnetic waves travel inside human tissue, and two, a blurry microwave image. By mapping these two things together, I can extract a clear image. Now, there are other imaging strategies out there that perform some kind of mapping, but in order to understand how those electromagnetic waves travel, they have to use expensive computers that take hours. I do something a little bit different. I image a blueberry. Okay, that may sound a little bit ridiculous, but hear me out. Blueberries are easy to handle and their electrical properties very closely mimic that of tissue. By measuring the electrical properties of a blueberry, I gain an understanding of how those electromagnetic waves travel inside and around tissue. This makes my algorithm run in seconds and incredibly appears to improve image resolution. It seems that it's actually better to rather measure how those electromagnetic waves travel inside tissue than to try and estimate how they travel using expensive computers. My goal is to bring microwave holography to clinical use in the next 5 years. So hopefully, the next time you go to get a scan done, instead of thinking, is this going to give me cancer? You're thinking, what smells like popcorn? Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So that's Daniel. Okay, so he begins with X-rays cause cancer. Notice one-word sentences in effect with pauses in between those words. And then notice that he has emphatic gestures with the right arm while walking stage left. So he uses his right arm to gesture and he walks in this direction to the stage left. It's a little unnerving to think about, isn't it? I'm sure most of us here have had X-ray scans done at some point in our lives. He is instantly communicating with a general audience. There's no beating about the bush. There is no preamble. He jumps straight into an important issue that will affect anybody. Anybody would want to listen to this. So Danny and Rachel, would you like to comment on any of this?
I think too, watching that video, what really comes through to me, having seen a bunch of students go through this process, is how conversational Daniel Tajik is. And it just seems natural. It seems like he's only presenting to you and you're having a conversation, but that's a lot more difficult to do. And you'll see in preparation for this competition, you really want to sound conversational and connect with the audience. And I think Daniel does a great job of that.
And notice, by the way, two things. He ended one sentence with microwave holography, and then he began the next sentence with microwave holography. So he's introducing some technical jargon, but then he simply says microwave holography is a mathematical process, or words to that effect. So he kind of doesn't expect the audience to know what microwave holography is. That's really important. So he introduces a little jargon. And by the way, you may also have noticed in a video that when you stumble, when you hesitate, there's one moment where he hesitates or stumbles a little bit. in real time in an in-person presentation, you don't notice it. You only see that on the video. It's just we're sort of tuned to see that on a video, but in person, we think a little bit of a stumble, a little bit of a hesitation is normal. Anyway, Rachel, any thoughts about Danny?
I was going to add that your video that you just showed was a good example of how even after the speech, or your performance continues even after the last word of your speech. So we saw that Dan said, does something smell like popcorn? And then your video showed that he had to still stand there and leave the stage, or walk backwards and leave the stage. And just from an audience point of view, or even a judge's point of view, the impression of you continues even until you're complete off the stage, especially for in-person presentations. When we're doing virtual or digital presentations, we can cut the video, and that's the last moment we see you, and that's the last opportunity we have to make an impression, or you have to make an impression on your audience. But when you're in person, you have to remember that your speech continues even beyond that last word, and you can see that on this current slide that John has.
Right, yeah, how Daniel closes with, for example, notice that what smells like popcorn, and then thank you, and he steps back at the very end. And I think that idea of stepping back, I think makes also gives you a kind of a final impression of Daniel. Now, one of the things I should mention is my goal is to bring microphilography to clinical use in the next 5 years. It is 5 years from then. Right now is 5 years. It's not in clinical use. So one of the things that I should also warn everybody is, when you make predictions, it's okay to be excited about your work, but sometimes predictions are not so accurate. So beware of predictions of something going to clinical use in 5 years when it's still a very, very complex problem. Anybody from the audience want to ask a question here, or comment, or ask anything about what you've seen? Please just unmute yourself and ask a question. And by the way, talking about what smells like popcorn and trying to kind of dispel the idea that microwaves has something to do necessarily with microwave ovens is a very risky thing to do. I remember when we were practicing that, when we were rehearsing that before we went to Hawaii, I really cautioned him about that final statement about popcorn. He's talking about cancer. Now he talks about popcorn, introduces some humor. So that may not go down very well. And yet, you know, still the audience seems to have overlooked that. So somehow the way he presented those last lines made him empathetic and so on. So the idea of the popcorn was something that people seem to overlook. Again, anybody before I go on to the next example? Okay, Canxiu Zhang from McMaster University, brainwave analysis for stroke detection. Now, this to me is a really, really interesting presentation as well. And so watch very carefully. Watch how she moves, watch her gestures, watch what she says, watch those, listen to those opening lines and listen to those closing lines. Okay, and we'll talk about them at the end.
Have you, your relatives, your friends ever suffered from a stroke? A stroke could happen to you at any time. You may even be completely unaware of it. Late diagnosis could result in permanent disability or even death. My name is Canxiu. I want to detect this condition earlier and prevent these tragedies from occurring. Let me tell you about the brain. Brain cell activity generate brain waves. They reveal information about this activity, like billions of radio stations transmitting data every single second. This information can include abnormal cerebral blood flow, which is a sign of brain stroke. This information is key, but challenging to extract from the massive amount of data. My research is to find the brainwave information most relative to the brain strokes and detect it in a quick and easy way. I calculated a list of numbers, each number representing how brain activity changes in the different locations of the brain at different times. However, these numbers are encrypted in a higher dimensional space. It's like trying to read a message on a crumpled paper ball. So how would you read this information? By unfolding the piece of paper, of course. This is exactly what I did mathematically. After I unfolded the special higher dimensional space of the numbers I calculated, the difference between brain waves from a normal person compared to a person who had a stroke became clear and detectable. My method was able to detect a stroke with 92% accuracy within 30 seconds. Now I'm working on the next step. After unfolding, stretching the space to make that difference even clearer for detection. In the future, a stroke still could happen to you at any time. But this time, you will be aware of it. Your loved ones, your family members can help you better. Thank you.
Great, that was a really nice presentation. And by the way, Daniel Tajik was in that competition too. And I still remember he was looking very anxious when he saw her presentation because it was really so good. And he won that competition as well. And Canxiu came second in that competition. It was an incredible. She would definitely have come first if Daniel wasn't in that competition. So to me, I have a hard time not remembering the opening lines. Have you, your relatives, your friends ever suffered from a stroke? A stroke could happen to you at any time. The pauses, how she moved and so on, are really incredible. She hooks the audience right away, right at the audience. She's asking the audience questions. Again, there's no preamble, nothing to sort of cast doubt upon what she's going to talk about, but she's hooking the audience right away. And of course, she has to deliver something, having said all this. And then at the end, in the future, a stroke still could happen to you at any time, but this time you'll be aware of it. Your loved ones, your family members can help you better. And then she bows. So that's her opening and closing lines. Rachel, any comments on her presentation?
So I wasn't a judge in this competition, but I was present in the room when both this presentation and Dan's presentation took place. And this one really stuck out in my memory after all these years because of how great her analogy was. And so it really helped a non-specialist audience member like me understand how she could go about detecting stroke. And perhaps the idea of stroke is a little bit more clinical and a little bit more understandable to a general audience, but even with other presentations that have non-clinical implications or applications, a really good analogy helps you stand out and become a little bit more memorable. And I remember the effort that she put into this was very obvious, and you can see that in the video as well.
Yeah, and that slide, and remember the interesting thing about Daniel's slide and about her slide, these are photographs that the presenters took personally. It's a personal photograph. And I remember talking to her about that. I worked with her, I rehearsed with her as well. And she was incredibly dedicated to that particular event. And the idea of a line on a piece of paper and then crumpling it up and then unraveling that line or finding that line by smoothing out that crumpled piece of paper. I mean, to me, that's an incredible image. It doesn't give you any hint really to a non-audience, a non-technical person what the mathematics is behind it. Believe me, I was at her thesis defense as well, and it's totally abstract, totally mathematical. You would not recognize her presentation for her defense if you saw this. You would say, these are two totally different presentations, but it's the same, it was the same subject. One was technical and one was non-technical. Danny, any comments?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing too, that the slide's incredible, and it shows how important it is to kind of start with the slide and use that to sort of inform your presentation. So in Canxiu's case, it does a great job with the analogy, and in Daniel's case, they didn't really show the slide originally, but if you notice in Daniel's presentation, he didn't mention the blueberry until well into his presentation, and it creates that mystery. So make sure you use your slide very tactfully, and we're going to continue talking about that, but it's really important to have a really effective presentation.
Yeah, Rachel?
John, can I add in? Yeah, I just want to add in one more thing, just in seeing these two presentations again. So with this presentation, because it's filmed, it might be distracting to see how she's walking across the screen, but in person, it's not as distracting because we're not sort of confined to this little box, which you would be while you're watching the filming of her 3MT. So if you're worried about, if you want to walk across the stage and if you're worried about it, it's not as distracting as it is when you see it in a virtual format.
Right. Your movement, which is a good thing that you mentioned that, Rachel. Your movements need to be deliberate. They need to be choreographed to your presentation. Any kind of swaying movement like this, or anything that back and forth, that is very distracting. That's uncorrelated to what you're saying. See, this is uncorrelated to what I'm saying right now, and very distracting. But if your movements are correlated with what you're saying, you can take up the whole stage, and it looks quite normal. Danny, there's somebody waiting to be admitted.
Yeah, I admitted them. It just says joining.
Oh, good. Okay. So yeah, and anyway, we can come back to this in a little while. We'll come back to slides and images and so on, and there's more things to say about them. But now, I hope Valentina is here watching this, because we have a little surprise. We're going to play her video, and we're going to comment on it. And Rachelle Ho was one of the judges. So Rachel, you better prepare your defense or your case later on, okay? So this is Valentina Palazzi's tireless ears for sensing vibrations, and she was the second place winner in our virtual competition in 2021. So again, watch for clarity, watch for purposeful movements, and we can discuss them at the end of this, and we can also ask Valentina if she wants to comment on any of this as well.
Everything vibrates, and vibrations produce sounds. Violin strings, airplanes, bridges all vibrate, contributing to the symphony of the universe. But not all sounds are music, right? Humming, scratching, who cares? Well, we should, because these sounds can save lives. Sounds are used to check the integrity of airplanes and to predict engine failures. Can you imagine of something more important than this when leaving for a trip? Now, our ears capture sounds, but our ears are limited, both in space, as they are confined within our body, and in time, as our attention is discontinuous. Fortunately, we can rely on wireless vibration sensors, our tireless ears. Vibration sensors can listen carefully even to noise, detect anomalies, and transmit the alarm wirelessly in real time. However, commercial sensors cannot be placed everywhere. The sensors are usually battery operated, so they must be available to be recharged. In addition, if temperatures go too high or too low, electronics get into trouble. My name is Valentina Palazzi. I'm from the University of Perugia, and the goal of my research is to make truly autonomous wireless sensors. Sensors which can operate on their own with no external help, even in harsh conditions. How do we do that? First, by developing sensors which need no battery power at all. The sensors are interrogated by wireless signals and simply reflect back the signals. Second, by removing electronics from the sensors. Instead of using devices that must be switched on and off, we print 3D structures which change their shape based on physical variables such as vibration. These structures interact with wireless signals, modifying them with the sensor information. Not so different from what your ears do. In the end, we just want to simplify technology to simplify our life and make wireless vibration sensors face the storm while we safely listen to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony on our flight. Thank you.
So there it is. Let me talk briefly about her opening and closing lines, and then I'll let Danny and Rachel speak, unless Valentina wants to jump in at any moment, interrupt. And by the way, I should mention that these lines that you're seeing here, and also for Daniel, Tajik, and Canxiu, Zhang, are my interpretation. So these gestures, these words, are my interpretation of what I am seeing on the video. It's the video, it's what's said on the video, what I see on the video, that I kind of transcripted here. So emphatic hand gestures, and of course she's smiling quite a lot, which is also always helpful. Everything vibrates, and vibrations produce sounds. Violin strings, airplanes, bridges, all vibrate, contributing to the symphony of the universe. But not all sounds are music, right? So again, there is definitely an engagement of the audience there. There's certainly something people can understand. And I'm glad she mentioned violin strings, airplanes, and bridges, because that also somehow signals that something important is coming. It's not just music, but there's also something of a mystery here, airplanes and bridges. At the end, she says, not so different from what your ears do. In the end, we just want to simplify technology, to simplify our life, and make wireless vibration sensors face the storm while we safely listen to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony on our flight. So again, she is moving between music, Beethoven's music, classical music, music that you enjoy, with sounds that are used in detecting things that are going wrong with an electromechanical system, for example. So there is this analogy between music and what she's actually doing. And again, it definitely, the audience can relate to it. But one of the things that jumps out to me, and we can debate this in a moment, is in the middle of a presentation, she says, sounds can save lives. I wish she had said that earlier in her opening. I wish she might have come back to that at the end. That might have had a little bit more impact. But that's my bias right now. So Valentina, if you're there, I'll give you a response before we get Rachel and...
Sure. So hi, everybody. So I don't have the video. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can hear me because my connection is not very good, but
we can hear you.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's very emotional to see it, to watch it after, a year or so. But yes, what I can say is that at the beginning, when I started it, I attended a workshop like this one. I thought oh my God, how can I make it important to people? Because I thought that, you know, my topic was not on biomedical engineering, it was about technical stuff. And so I think, actually, this is the second time I attended the 3-minute thesis. I did it also in 2019, and I had the same problem at that time. So yeah, I think the effort that I made, I don't know if, you know, I did all that I could anyway, was to make it important to, you know, understand which were the part of my research that were actually important or interesting for the audience. And so basically, instead of talking about, you know, the structure, the 3D structure that was all the old research, I talk about what kind of problems I could solve for people. Yeah, I think that this was what I tried to do mostly. And yeah.
So thank you, Valentina. Rachel, you were a judge. What happened? Why is she second?
So hi, Valentina. Congratulations on this speech again. It's really nice to see it again as well, and to think back to that time a year ago. So why is she second? Well, I don't think I have much to defend. I think Valentina's speech spoke for itself. It's also very unique. John, so I think the sound save lives, I think that is impactful, but also because she didn't put it as her first line, her speech became, it was compartmentalized a little bit differently. So I think many of the speeches have a clinical application, and so they kind of have a very similar sounding to them, like, oh, we're going to improve lives, or we're going to save lives, we're going to improve health. Whereas Valentina went with almost a different take, and it still had such a cool application, and it actually it stood out for that reason as well. Like, it was the music speech, and so I mean, I think you're right, John. It could have had I guess we could reimagine Valentina's speech and have a different take on it. And but also it really worked out really well for her here. And some things that I would like to add that were very tactful in this speech was that Valentina sat and she didn't move. So it's okay to sit. I guess this is for a virtual competition, but even in person, it's really easy to sway. And when Valentina sat and didn't move, we could just focus on her words really well. And she spoke so clearly and confidently. You could tell she put so much effort into it, and it really paid off.
Yeah, but she did use a lot of very significant gestures with her hands. Yeah, there was, and by the way, these movements with hands and gestures, they tend to be invisible. You tend not to see them unless you make yourself unless you're conscious of it. I mean, you're not supposed to see them as an audience. The audience member is not supposed to think, oh, she's moving her hand here or she's moving her hand there. You're not supposed to do that. But as a presenter who's trying to do an engaging presentation, knowing what to do when really helps you. So Danny, any additional comments?
Yeah, I think the hand gesture is definitely important. It's very much like breathing with your hand gestures. Once you start thinking about it, you can get a little too much inside your head too. So just kind of flow with what's natural and do some practice and watch video back of you presenting. What sticks out to me in this presentation, it's kind of a theme through all the presentations that are really good in this 3-minute thesis format, is look at how short the sentences are. So everything vibrates. If a lot of people, when they approach these competitions, they start writing it like it's the intro to an abstract, but you really want to shorten up those sentences and think about what it's going to sound like conversationally and what people are going to focus on. So notice that and take the time and say your script out loud and present it to people, see what they pick up on and what they miss, and tailor that. And you can see Valentina's put a lot of work into the script, and it really comes through with how natural it sounds.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, the thing I think I like about Valentina's present is her script is really quite what I would call uniform in terms of being understandable, and in terms of the importance. I think she builds up gradually to how important her work is, and then leaves us with a good feeling at the end about Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So Valentina, do you want to say a few last minute words about that?
No, I think it's okay. So thank you for for these comments and everything. Yes, I think, I worked it a lot, and I trusted John a lot, because at the beginning it was not like this, but so we had the training are very, very important. And so at the beginning, there is a kind of process. You don't have to come up with this the very first moment. You start with an idea, and then it's good to see how the idea evolve. And yeah, I'm very happy of the final version.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Valentina. One of the things that people should realize is this will be more frustrating than you imagine. You will, and I think Danny also alluded to this, is that you will begin by writing what looks like the abstract of a technical paper. I mean, which is okay. Start anywhere. You must commit yourself to something. You can't just have it rolling around in your head. You've got to commit yourself to something, and then you have to keep reworking. This kind of creative writing takes an awful lot of practice. It doesn't come instantly. So unless you are already a creative writer, unless you're already a science writer, able to engage an audience, this can be quite challenging. So it looks easy when you see it. But listen, slalom skiing in an Olympic game, that looks easy, right? But I don't think most of us could do it. So what looks easy is not necessarily easy to create. So let's move on. And so as we mentioned, opening words need to be very carefully chosen. You need to be, metaphors need to be carefully chosen, words carefully chosen. And by the way, one of the things that you should notice that most of the speakers spoke quite slowly. Please speak slowly. Don't rush through the presentation. Be redundant, You help people memorize concepts and ideas by repetition. Repetition emphasizes an important point. Repetition emphasizes an important point, just like I've done at this particular moment. And you didn't notice it. You think it's natural. But if I want to emphasize something, I use the word emphasize several times, right? I've used the word emphasize quite a number of times in the last few seconds. Why? Because I want to emphasize redundancy. And I've been redundant in emphasizing redundancy. Repeat troublesome, unexpected, or important words. Get your grammar checked. There is nothing worse than a grammatically bad presentation, because people from different cultures with different ways of expressing themselves will have a hard time with peculiarities of grammar. Again, don't speak in a monotone. You need to vary your tone, and don't seem approachable. Don't swallow words. And by swallowing words, what I mean is something that happens to quite a number of people is they start, fairly strong in a sentence. They go up very loudly, and then they tail off at the end. They go up in the middle of a sentence, and they tail off at the end. And the end of a sentence often disappears. This is what I mean by swallowing words. Don't sabotage your name. If you're going to introduce yourself, give yourself a memorable label. If your name is complex or unique or strange, say it very, very slowly. Repeat your name if necessary. Yes, my name is John Bandler, John Bandler, Bandler. You see, I've just been redundant and I'm not sabotaging my name. Don't sabotage your first impression, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And obviously cut the jargon. Be very careful about jargon. Words like cognitive, radiation, Bluetooth, metadata, these are in general usage, but do people understand them? Do people really understand them when you're using them in a technical sense? You have to be very careful. Words that are frequently misunderstood. And one word that I constantly bring up that is misunderstood is the word parameter. When you're using the word parameter as a scientist or engineer, we usually mean a controllable variable of a design variable. Parameter in colloquial English means constraint. Under what parameters am I operating? Meaning, under what constraints am I operating? So if you use the word parameter, for example, in a way that is unfamiliar, and the word model, if you use those words in unfamiliar manner, they may be completely misunderstood. So be very careful about that. Anybody want to ask any questions about jargon? This often raises questions about what they should say or shouldn't say. A lot of people sometimes say, I have to put all this jargon in. I can't present without this. Well, in 3-minute thesis, you have to be very careful about this, about having jargon. Single static slides, keep them simple. And I would suggest develop your slide first. I know this is in a way counterintuitive. We're thinking of, let's develop the script and then find a slide to decorate the presentation. The slide is not a decoration. The slide is there for the full duration. It has to tell a story by itself. So if you have a slide developed first, for example, this one, you develop your slide, then you can, then your script can be created to complement your slide. Notice the blueberry. That blueberry was not mentioned until about halfway through the presentation. So people were looking at that blueberry, wondering, what does a blueberry have to do with breast cancer detection? And notice the structure of that slide. If you're into classical art, into the art history, you'll know that entering from the bottom left-hand corner of a painting is a classical way of entering from the bottom of my, if I look at my screen here, the bottom left is over here, and I enter in that direction. Of course, from your point of view, it's this direction. You enter, you see that blueberry immediately, then your eye moves on and you see those other out of focus blueberries. You see the waveguides. It introduces some mystery here. But the blueberry is absolutely essential to Daniel's research. Sniffing out weapons with microwaves. Again, weapon detection. Weapon detection. You could have shown weapons. You could have put a weapon there. You could have made this look horrific. There are all kinds of horrific things you can do. But this suggestion is really quite good. And notice, by the way, the credit. And you may have noticed this already, the citation to to whoever created that image, the photograph, the image, whether it came off the internet and so on. Again, with Canxiu Zhang, notice the crumpled piece of paper, and she credits herself as taking that photograph. If you don't credit yourself, it's will be taken as understood, but you need to credit the photographer or the artist or wherever you got this thing from. Some of you may remember Mahmoud Waghi's Collecting Radio Rain. Again, an interesting metaphor for recharging batteries. I mean, who would think that this has something to do with, you know, collecting microwave power? But anyway, there it is. And he came second in that respective 3-minute thesis competition. Again, audience members, I'm begging you to jump in, unmute. Have we said nothing controversial? Have we said nothing to upset anybody? Have we said anything to make anybody happy? They're all asleep or drinking coffee or something. So.
I have a question.
Good, wonderful.
I was just wondering, are there in general any restrictions about the slides which we do? Does it have to be a single photograph, or is there any restriction?
An interesting question. So what you're saying, for example, is can you take 5 slides or 5 pictures and squeeze them into one? Is that what you mean?
For example, or put a diagram in there, or whatever.
Bad idea, very bad idea. You want to keep it simple. Look how simple this is. It doesn't get more simple than that. There are really no circuit diagrams. You know, you have to resist the temptation to make this look like a technical presentation. You have to resist the temptation when somebody says 1 slide, that you take 10 slides and you just simply put them all into one. That's not the idea.
Yeah.
That will confuse everybody. And remember, this is supposed to be relevant and understandable to anybody. if the slide and your presentation should be understandable to any member, any friend, family member, stranger you meet in a coffee shop.
Yeah, but I mean, a diagram is the extreme case, and I'm not planning to do that. But
right.
does it have to be like, because all the images we saw have some kind of a meta layer, or so they are a little bit. So you have to think about them, and what does it have to do, and so does it have to be like this, or can it be more technical?
No,
can it be a photograph of a chip or something?
Of course. As okay. Again, Valentina Palazzi did have some technical aspect to her presentation. Look, if you look at her slide.
Yeah, you're right.
The only problem is, you know, you're not, unless the picture of unless that diagram or the picture of the chip has some intrinsic meaning to a general member of the audience. I mean, it's really, it doesn't necessarily contribute to the understanding of your research, why it's important. The idea of 3-minute thesis is, who are you, what are you doing, and why it's important to a member of the audience. But you know, in general, you can do whatever you like. You can make your slide as complex as you like, but I discourage that, and those tend not to be winning presentations.
Okay. Understand. Thank you.
You go ahead. Yeah.
May I add a
No,
comment?
sorry.
Yeah, please, Luca, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, just to clarify, actually adding up on what he was saying, that keep in mind that the judges will not be technical people. I mean, we are selecting people from, let's say, musician, or rather, as John suggested, people that from really general audience. Of course, some of them have some technical education, but not necessarily in deep in our microwave stuff. And therefore, you have to be able to communicate to these kind of people, really a general audience. I mean, your target are these people that are general audience, not really technical colleagues. That's very important to keep in mind. And this is the reason why probably you should try to avoid as much as possible strictly technical content in your slide, because it cannot be understood essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. They can be poets, musicians, librarians. They can be the manager of a supermarket. They can be a school principal. They could be your cousin. They could be anybody.
Just to give you an idea, probably there will be actually one should be a musician. We are just, let's say, trying to set up this. And another one is people that is used to, let's say, a venture capitalist that is used to select startups from a very short pitch presentation. Therefore, something that is completely non-technical, but okay, there are technical content, but you have to be able to transfer and to let them understand the technical content with non-technical words, essentially. Like if you are selling, let's say, your company, or you are finding funds for your company. That's the point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Thank you, Luke. That was a great observation. Great observation. Yeah. And we can come back to this in a moment as well. And by all means, raise that issue again, please, anybody. That's very, very important. A very important issue. Okay. So core images make the memory, and mystery helps. And here are some interesting core images as I think of them. The blueberry, a person pulling a suitcase, a line on a crumpled piece of paper. Aline used a tarantula. Definitely watch her video where Aline introduces Lucy, the tarantula, and ends with what will make Lucy happy at the end. So the tarantula, water glasses under an umbrella, and Jay Sheth, who won the competition in 2020, by the way, a wildfire, and so on. A core image. And titles should be catchy but meaningful. So here are some interesting titles: Sniffing Out Weapons with Microwaves, Origami, Unfolding the Future of Engineering, Are We Drinking Pharmaceuticals? Where Does Cancer Begin? Fighting Obesity with Fat, tireless ears for sensing vibration. These are all meaningful titles. They actually have a real meaning, both technically and non-technically. Imagine titles that have a meaning technically and non-technically. So they mean something technically to a technical audience, and they would mean something to a non-tech. And by the way, sniffing the weapons is metaphorical. Now, hopefully the audience will not understand real sniffing like a dog. A dog might be sniffing. So the word sniffing could be misunderstood. Okay, so there are things where you have to be a little bit careful. Again, tireless ears for sensing vibrations. Who knows? Those tireless ears could be the ears of your watchdog. Maybe a dog outside your house who's listening to what's going on. I mean, so tireless ears or sniffing out weapons could be misunderstood, but they're definitely very meaningful. Now, what I did is I paraphrased these openings using my own words here, and saying something that means essentially the same thing. For example, occurring with little apparent warning, strokes are a leading cause of disability. Nothing wrong with that. Looks like almost the opening of maybe a technical paper or a newspaper article or something. But Canxiu Zhang says, have you, your relatives, your friends ever suffered from a stroke? It's saying the same thing. You're saying the same thing. The more a person undergoes X-ray scans, the greater the risk they will develop cancer. Nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly understandable. X-rays cause cancer. It's a little unnerving to think about, isn't it? So one is a little bit more, let's say, restrained, and the ones that were actually used are a little bit more dramatic. And they're not really over dramatic. They are meaningfully dramatic. So Rachel and Danny, you want to jump in there at all?
I don't have too much to contribute, except that the shorter sentences, as Danny had spoken about before, you can actually see them now in comparison to the more technical or long line that John has written. That would be an alternative, maybe if you were to write it at the beginning of a paper, but in a speech, those shorter sentences are a little bit more snappy and memorable.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, and then sort of along those lines too, the way it's written is connecting with people, and it's evoking emotion in those shorter sentences, and that's so important to connect on that emotional level, because people will remember that rather than they'll quickly forget facts and things you said. But if you can connect with them on that emotional level, they'll remember it.
Right. Again, Mahmoud Wagi, there's again the same kind of idea. It is not only hard to contemplate the complete wastage of every drop of precipitation that impacts the Earth's surface, but it's also implausible. Okay, a nice, long, complicated sentence that means the same thing as imagine if all the rain was wasted. That doesn't sound right. I mean, it means the same thing. So there are so many ways of saying the same thing. And Jay Chef, by the way, who won the 2020 competition, again, snappy opening lines, which mean essentially the same thing as my paraphrase in italic above his lines. Closing lines. So Mahmoud Wagi has good opening and closing lines. Imagine if all the rain was wasted. That doesn't sound right. Thankfully, this doesn't really happen to rain. So that's the opening. My goal is to get you to forget about your batteries, but please don't forget about your umbrellas. And he looks up at that particular point. And by the way, although that was a virtual competition, Mahmoud's presentation was really quite an amazing presentation. Anyone have any questions about opening and closing lines? Let's jump into a few of the details. Now, with online things like we're dealing with here, there are all kinds of limitations and assumptions about, but I don't want to get into them. If we were talking about a virtual competition or a virtual presentation like we're having now, there are all kinds of other issues I would go into details on. And if your competition was a virtual one, there's a whole host of other slides that I would be using to get you to be engaging. For example, one little tip that I would suggest: your camera is there. If you're doing a presentation, a 3-minute thesis, virtually, look into the camera from time to time, because that's where the audience is. Don't look at the screen. Look away to signal some kind of thought process or gesture, a meaningful gesture by looking away, but then look back to the audience. And by the way, frame yourself. You see where I'm framed? My head is virtually touching the top. My arms are visible. I should be a little bit further back for a good presentation so that my arms and hands are visible as well. So anyway, but we're not going to go into that. But if anybody has any questions about those things, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay, a few things here. 120 words per minute is what I really recommend. Don't go more than 120 words per minute. You're just going to be rushing. You will not be leaving pauses. Very bad idea to go beyond 120 words per minute. Story format. Start with the hero of the story. The hero could be you. The hero could be Lucy the tarantula. The hero could be Cinderella. The hero could be you, a member of the audience. You talk about a member of the audience as if they are the hero of the story, but then you end with them. So bookend your presentation. How you begin should signal to you how you should end. And again, move around while memorizing script. Do not try to memorize your script by looking at a screen. Put it on your phone, put it on a sheet of paper, walk around, go to different places. You don't know what that physical auditorium is going to look like. You don't know where the stage is going to be. You don't know where the audience is going to be. You don't know how you're going to be going up. You need to be as flexible as possible. If you memorize sitting like this, staring at a screen, memorizing and think you're ready, you're not ready. You haven't even started. You have to go into an auditorium and practice, walk around. Notice again with Daniel, Tajik, and Canxiu, Zhang, they used the stage, they moved around. And you need to memorize it in those kinds of ways. Any comment there, Danny or Rachel?
I would say too, what's also important is, I don't know if in the online way we do it to practice through Zoom, but if you can get to where you're going to be presenting a little bit ahead of time and just get comfortable in that space and maybe run through it either in your head or out loud if you have that opportunity, because it's so critical to make you feel comfortable when you're up there on stage to have that preparation. Good,
very good point. You know, get there the day before, 2 days before, find an empty room, go and practice. Don't be shy. Let them kick you out if you feel kicked out, but go ahead and practice. Go to the room if you can, if it's available. Go and practice. Just go to different empty rooms in the convention center if there are any, and just go there and stand on the stage and practice. And by the way, nowadays when people are walking down the street, speaking as if they're speaking to nobody pays attention, because people think they're talking to somebody on the phone. So you could be walking down the street practicing your presentation. Okay, again, don't look like you're reading a script. Remember, if you have just memorized your presentation, you may be struggling. What is the next word? What's the next line? You start reading like a robot. And then when you forget what the next word is or the next line, then you stop and think, oh my God, I don't remember the next line. That's not how you memorize. That's not how actors memorize a script. They go far beyond memorization. They try to internalize it. So if something goes wrong, like you forget a line, you know the gist of what you should be saying. You know the gist of where you should be. You should be able to recover. So learn to be in the moment. Being in the moment, be right there with the audience You're thinking your way through your presentation. You're not thinking about the next word or next line. You're thinking about the gist of the presentation. Right now, for example, I'm thinking about the gist of what I'm presenting. I don't know what my next line is going to be. I really don't. But I'm in the moment right now. And as I say, learn to be in that moment. Actors do this thing all the time. They forget a line, they improvise on something that makes sense, and the writer or director says, yes, that's great, let's keep that. You might come up with a better line if you're not sticking exactly to the script. Rachel, Danny, any thoughts?
I was going to say that when I was going through this as a competitor, so quite a few years ago, I worked with John, and one of the things he had me do, which was quite helpful, was to film myself again and again and again, and then to keep listening back to yourself, which is a very painful experience. But what it really helped me do was externalize my voice, so I'm hearing it. And I think when people go up on stage, and it's quite scary sometimes, it's a possibly an externalizing experience as well. So when you get used to hearing your own voice from an external source like a computer, it helps sort of dull that experience of being on stage and hearing the awkwardness of your voice, or hearing your voice as it echoes through a room. So I would also recommend that, because we are going to be live, and possibly for the first time in a long time, you're going to be presenting to quite a large audience. So practice being in these very uncomfortable scenarios and hearing what your voice sounds like and being okay with it.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Danny, any
Yeah, that's excellent advice to listen to your voice back and be really comfortable with your script. So if you want, you could drop a sentence. And we talked about earlier, redundancy, having that redundancy built in your script. So if you fumble a word, or it doesn't come through clearly, or the microphone cuts out for a second, you have that redundancy built in, so your presentation still makes sense, even if you were to take a sentence out.
Yeah. And by the way, something that I've added recently to my workshops is listen to your audience. Listen to the audience. Imagine yourself in the minds of the audience right at that moment. Now, if you're struggling with your script, it's impossible. You're just struggling for the next line. You're not thinking about the audience, you're thinking about yourself. You need to be thinking about the audience. So you need to be constantly monitoring what you're saying, how you're saying it, and how it's coming across. And you need, in effect, to adapt. If you hear the audience laughing, or you hear some movement or something in the audience, you need to somehow respond to that, or you need to appear to be responding. I know this is really very difficult, and maybe several layers below where we should be in, but these are all really important issues. And we'll come to dress momentarily, in particular now. First impressions, and Danny mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation. So in a live presentation, the judges are probably looking at you already where you're seated. They may be looking at you wondering, oh, maybe he's next or she's next. Let me see, what are their names? Oh, that's interesting. I wonder how she or he is going to present that. So they may already be assessing you before you even go to the stage. So when you go to the stage and you're stumbling and you don't know where the stairs are and you're fumbling and you say, oh, microphone isn't working, all of those things make an impression. And they unfortunately will make an impression before you even begin your presentation. Sadly, it's not possible for you to tell the audience, ignore what I looked like when I was sitting with the other competitors. Ignore the fact that I fell as I came onto the stage. Ignore the fact that I said, "Can you hear me?" Just concentrate on my presentation. Life doesn't work that way. Okay, sadly. So they may be biased, they may dislike your slide, they will absorb audience reaction. If audience is laughing because you fell down as you got onto the stage, it's hard to erase that. I wish I could help you by erasing that from your presentation, but it's difficult. Rachel and Danny, any comments here?
Danny, I don't know if I was cutting you off, but
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So I mean, I don't have too much more to add to what John said, because I really strongly agree with how your impression starts before you even say your first word, and it continues even before you get off the stage until you're completely out of earshot, out of eyesight of the judges. They're continuing to form an opinion of you, and you're doing that of them as well. But because they know you're a competitor, you're under a little bit more scrutiny. And so when you're in person, remember that they can even hear you even after your speech is done. So once all speeches are done, be mindful of who's in your environment, what you're saying, and continuing your impression afterwards as well. It's really hard to ignore everything that goes into your impression of you. Yeah, that's all I really have to add. I don't know if that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah, and we were talking about first impressions, by the way, and here's something that you probably totally overlooked consciously. The fact that his tie is blue, and if you recall going back to his slide, there's a blueberry, and the logos, the IEEE and MTT logos are blue. So he is color coordinated with his slide and with the logos. Is that an accident or is that deliberate? And notice that he was trying to figure out what is best for him to wear. Sleeves all the way to his wrists, or rolled up sleeves. And if you go back to the video, you'll see rolled up sleeves was what he chose eventually. And his tie, by the way, is nicely tied so that the tip of the tie ends at his belt. These are all very important issues that give some kind of a first impression. Anybody want to jump in? Is there anybody there who is kind of style conscious that wants to jump in on this? So that's all about first impressions. And here he is, again, there he is. Notice rolled up sleeves, his tie, the logos, all color coordinated. Okay, so be authentic, be yourself. People would prefer you to be yourself than to try to be somebody else. For some reason that is inexplicable, maybe it happens to me too, is when you go on stage to give a presentation, your speech somehow becomes different. It's like you're going into a temple or a church and you feel you have to speak in a different tone, a different voice. Just be yourself, be sincere, don't pretend. And kill that fake speech mode that we unfortunately all seem to go into when we're on a stage. Be approachable, be the kind of person that looks like you can be approached after the whole thing is over to say, can you tell me more about your work? So Danny and Rachel, do jump in any time here. We're near the end. And again, be clear, avoid mind-twisting logic. We talked about this already. Keep sentences short and punchy. And speak words clean, crisp, and clear. Don't roll words together. If there are certain technical words that have to be used unavoidably, don't roll them together into one long word that somebody says, what did they just say? A few last minute tips now as we come to the end. Make sure your name is repeatable. There's nothing worse than somebody giving a presentation and a member of the audience wants to approach them later on and they don't remember what their name is. It's very difficult. It's kind of embarrassing. You're less likely to talk to somebody whose name you don't remember than to somebody whose name you remember. That's my kind of experience. Gesture with open hands. Avoid finger pointing when you can. Open hands, say, I have nothing to hide. This gives the impression that you have something to hide. Again, avoid this gesture. This gesture should be used if you're praying, nothing wrong with praying, or you're defending yourself. This is a defense. This is defensive. This is defensive. This says, I have nothing to hide. Again, slides, keep them simple. One main image, mystery, no jargon, no, by the way, spell out abbreviation, avoid abbreviations. And on your slides, your name should be in a large font, the title of your presentation in a large font, citations, and you take something from the internet, an image from the internet, put a citation, a URL in small font somewhere on that presentation. So for further study, you can Google MTT IMS YouTube 3MT playlists. You can Google my YouTube channel. You'll find a lot of stuff, workshops and so on my YouTube channel. And also IEEE Microwave Magazine 3MT articles. You can just simply Google 3MT microwave and you'll find all kinds of articles that are coming out and available for you to see. And that's it, grazie. So that's it for my formal presentation. I will stop sharing the screen at this stage. I can reshare if necessary. But let me stop sharing. So I hope that was satisfactory. But please, audience members, you must be burning with questions. No questions.
While we wait for questions or people typing in the chat, adding on to the most recent slide that John just shared about going further into look at old 3MTs, I think IMS produces some of the best speeches in the 3MT competition that I've seen, and I've seen quite a few, and I've watched quite a few on YouTube as well. And I think it is helpful to see a whole range of good and bad speeches. So look beyond just the IMS speeches, look at them as like a really high bar that you want to reach for, but then look at other ones on YouTube that you can find from other universities. I think a lot of universities are running them and are posting them online these days. So look at all 3MTs and it'll give you a chance to see what kind of slides you like, what you think are effective slides, especially Jonathan, to your question about whether or not you can be as literal as putting a trip on a slide. Yes, you can be. And as you watch more speeches, you'll get a sense of what you like and what you would like to convey with your speech.
Okay, sorry, I don't have a question, John, but I would like to very much thank you for this very useful, I believe, hints and informations, and I hope everybody can take advantage of this. And I'm sorry I have to leave for another meeting, but it was very, very useful also to people that, like me, are doing presentations since many years, but you never stop learning in your life. Therefore, thank you very much.
Thank you, Luca, for staying for so long. It must have been interesting somehow.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for your support. That's great.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, John, for a really interesting talk. I have a small question to ask. So, for example, if the total time to speak is around 3 minutes, do you have any advice on how should we divide the time, for example, starting with the description of the problem and then the solutions that we propose? Is there any balance between, for example, 1 minute describing the problem and 2 minutes describing the solution?
No, there really isn't. You know, you should, again, the whole idea is story. You have to tell it like a story. The word story doesn't mean fairy tale, but story has a certain kind of structure. It hooks you at the beginning. It draws you in some manner to draw you into the problem. And then you introduce yourself, say who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it, why it's important, what are the main features of your work. And then you exit from that by coming back to how you opened, making it relevant, you brought them into the story, and then you end the story in a satisfactory manner. Don't think of allocating time. But one of the things, you know, Valentina Palazzi was rather relaxed in how she entered the story and rather relaxed in coming out, and had some dramatic moments, important moments in the middle, and Rachelle Ho pointed that out. Canxiu, Zhang and Daniel Tajik were much more dramatic at the beginning. They pulled you into the story right away. but then they returned also. So there's no absolute formula. I mean, there are templates you can follow, but sometimes you need to break the rule. There are only two rules. The only rules you should not break are the Queensland rules for 3-minute thesis. Don't break the rule of 3 minutes, and don't break the rule of one static PowerPoint slide, and so on. But other than that, you know, be original in some manner. But it's very difficult. It's not easy. Overwrite your speech initially. Write too much, and then don't be afraid of editing, cutting. You will be surprised how easy it is to cut things back. Repetition of simple repetition is better than complex sentences.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, but don't think of a formula in terms of time, and don't hit the 3 minutes. It's not a race towards 3 minutes. It's not how many words can I get into 3 minutes. That's not the issue. You can do it for 2 minutes. You can do it for 1 minute. You can do it for 20 seconds.
Great, thank you very much.
So, yeah, I hope that helps. But as I say, the important thing is start right. Well, when I say start right, think of a title right away. Think of a slide. You need to think of a slide. Can you go out into the street and take a picture? Can you go out into the landscape, to the environment, and take a picture? Can you go to your lab and take a picture? Can you draw something and take a picture with it and make a slide? Though anything that you do personally will have more impact than something you take off the internet.
Great, useful advice. Thank you.
Yeah, and then once you have that slide, I know it's counterintuitive, you have that slide, think about the slide. Think of that slide, a picture. If you think about the cliche, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Then that slide is beaming 1,000 words at the audience. It has to say something, but it mustn't. But your speech maybe only has 360 or 300 words. So your speech is competing with the slide and the picture. And you don't want the slide to be too complex, because then people are trying to say, what is there? Why this color? Why is this red? Why is this green? What's this strange little thing doing over here? And while they're looking at the slide, thinking about that, they're not listening to you. The bottom line, so I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thanks a lot.
Rachel, Danny, any comments there?
No, I think that covers it really well. Again, the only formula that seems to kind of be consistent through a lot of the really good presentations is that book ending in the beginning and the end. And it's kind of a creative endeavor. There's not really a set formula of how long you should talk or anything like that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Anyone else? We'll go on for a few more minutes. And
I have another question.
sure.
You said that it's important to make it easy for the audience as well for the judges to memorize your name. Do you have any more tips on how to do that, and maybe even so? For example, my name can be pronounced in German and also in English. So there are different pronunciations for different languages. So would you recommend taking the English one all the way, or using the German one, or yeah?
Well, why don't you say your name right now? Let's solve the problem right away. Say it.
How I would pronounce it, you mean?
Yeah.
My name is Jonathan Shostak.
Okay, you said it very quickly. Okay,
Yep.
that's what jumped out. Nothing wrong with what you say. You're saying it the way you want it to be remembered, but say it more slowly.
Okay.
Say it more slowly, because again, remember, people from different countries, different cultures will hear it in such a different way. Say it, and say it in an anglicized way as well.
And in a what way?
Say it in an English. Say it in an English way as well.
In the English way.
Yeah.
I would pronounce it as Jonathan Shostak.
That's okay as well. You have to just notice that you said that more slowly. You see,
Okay.
when you're speaking in your native language, you tend to be faster because that's how you speak with your friends and family and so on, and people who know you. The important thing to remember about your name is people don't know you. They have no idea about your name. You said it a little bit more slowly in English. So you can say it in the German way, but say it more slowly, articulate it more carefully, and that would be acceptable. On the other hand, you can just say, my name is Jonathan.
Yeah. So we can just leave the surnames out.
There is nothing in the rule that says anything about names.
Okay.
Names don't have to be on slides. You don't have to say who you are. That will all be on the judges will have sheets with your name and the title and so on. You don't have to say anything. It's just a recommendation that you introduce yourself, but there is no rule that you have to give your name.
Okay. So to summarize, the only strict rules in general are the 3 minutes and the single slide, and everything else is basically and no additional things.
Right. And there are some details about objects, things like holding up objects or reading from a script and so on. But there's nothing in the rule that says you must introduce yourself. If you wanted to, you could have a completely blank slide. There's nothing, there has to be nothing on that slide at all, just a blank screen.
That's an interesting idea. Okay, thank you.
And I've seen some very, very simple, very, very simple slides, sometimes with no names at all.
Okay.
So again, if you want to be adventurous, try something, be risky. It doesn't matter if you fail, you'll learn something. So don't try to follow the formula if you want to be a risk taker. And if you take risks, it may fail, but that's okay.
Okay.
Anything, Rachel, you want to say anything there?
I actually did a workshop on how to say your name most confidently. And I mean, I don't know the scientific evidence, like I have not researched it that far. I just did a workshop on it before I did the 3MT, and they recommended your intonation be almost like an upside down V. And so actually the first time, Jonathan, I don't know how to say your name in the non-Anglophone version.
That's okay.
Sorry about that, but the way you said it the first time, you actually had that upside down V. You went up and down, and it's almost as if it was its own sentence. So I can do it with my own name, I don't mind. So I could say I'm Rachel Ho, almost with like a question mark, or I could say I'm Rachel Ho. And apparently that makes it a little bit more clear for people to understand. So I could do it with Danny Shields, or I could be Danny Shields, almost like its own sentence. And apparently that sticks out in people's mind. I don't know the literature about this. I did a workshop on it. I don't know how effective it is, but it's something you could potentially try and listen to it yourself and see what you like better. And I found that when you said it in the more Anglophone way, you had an actual, you just went up. And then maybe it's because you're less confident in saying your name that way, or you don't like the sound of it, you're less used to it. So I would say it in the way that you're most confident and say it slowly.
Okay, thank you.
Good, very good questions. Yeah. Any more? Any other questions? So, well, I guess most of you will be taking a holiday right now. Or well, maybe graduate students don't do holidays, so you just keep working. Start early. Start thinking now. Start thinking now about your slides. Start thinking about opening lines. How are you going to close it? The middle will take care of itself later. The middle is the hardest part in a certain sense. So, but start early. Start thinking about it. And start imagining yourself on the stage giving a presentation. And The earlier that you start, the better. Few people have dropped off, so which is reasonable. Thank you all for staying for so long.
Yeah, Professor Bandler, how do you think now we should proceed? So, do you think it's better if we organize the next meeting now, or we have? We take 2 or 3 weeks.
I think, yes, thanks, Simona. I think we should wait and kind of discuss that offline.
Okay.
Discuss that offline. You know, how much I can be available is not really clear at this moment, but yeah, we should talk about that offline. The other thing you also might want to think about, but that's an administrative issue, is the format of the slides. My recommendation is 4x3 slides for various, and all the examples that you saw, all the examples have 4x3 slides, not 16:9, but 4x3 for a certain reason. And there is also some other formalities and administrative details that you might want to discuss with me later, but we don't have to bother the audience with that right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So, well, guys, this is your opportunity. In 2 or 3 minutes, this will all be over, and you'll say, "Oh, I wished I asked them the following question." So, what are the questions that you wish that you will have wished to ask in an hour from now? Ask it now. Okay, let me ask a question. Who has done a 3-minute thesis here before? Who in the audience? Well, yeah, Rachel. I know you and Danny have done it. No, I mean, other than the presenters, who else has done any 3-minute thesis before? Okay, nobody. So you're all new to it. So, you know, one of the things that I want you to want to leave you with is watch any kind of presentation. Watch a technical presentation. Watch the news on TV. Watch interviews. Watch anybody present, and reverse engineer what they're doing. How are they moving their hands? How are they speaking? Are they leaving pauses? Are they being repetitive? How are they using a stage if they're moving around? Are they holding their hands like this? Notice, strangely enough, a lot of professionals on TV have their hands like this for most of the time. And I suspect that one of the reasons, it's high tension. And when you're on TV with millions of people watching you and you're not speaking, this helps you kind of steady yourself. It's really quite surprising. But what it tells me is that they're not as comfortable as they look. They're really quite uncomfortable, that it's high stress and high tension. So that's probably why they're holding their hands. So don't take that as an example. You want to be relaxed. Okay. You know what? I'm pretending to be relaxed right now. So reverse engineer and try to figure out what you like and what you don't like about those presentations. And listen to when they introduce themselves or they sign off and they give their name. Is that name clear? How clear is that name to someone who's never heard that name before? How clear is that name to someone from Hong Kong, China, Japan, India, Pakistan, Egypt? Think about it with their ears, with their mind. Okay, guys, so Danny and Danny will be online in a few minutes anyway. And Rachel, you can join us in a few minutes if you have time, just to do a bit of a post-mortem. But we should, turn the recording off right now.
Yeah.